Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. As always, I'm your host, Lucas McCann. With us today, Dr. Celia Zamora, Director, Professional Learning and Certification. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. So I gave a very short list of your credentials, Celia. I want to give you the chance to tell us a little bit more about your current position at ACTFL, but also some of the other things you're doing in the association community, and then we're going to backtrack and sort of follow the path forward into associations.
Sure, absolutely. So again, I'm the Director of Professional Learning and Certification at ACTFL, which is a nonprofit membership organization that seeks to empower and advocate for language educators and language education across the globe. I am also a proud member of the 2022 class of DELP. I am currently the chairwoman of the inaugural CAE Registered Provider Committee, as well as in the ASAE Research Committee. I couldn't think of that word. I was a chairwoman in the Association of Latinos as the Events and Relationship Building Committee, and just all around a great person to get to know in associations.
Yeah. And so some of the association, in the grander scheme of your career, the association stuff I'd say is fairly new. After the show, people are going to look you up if they don't already know you. They're going to look at your LinkedIn. They're going to see you've had a longer track of your career in education, and then maybe more recently jump into association. So talk to us a little bit briefly about your education background, how that came to be, and then how you kind of jumped into this crazy world of associations and nonprofits, which people don't normally find.
Sure. So one thing to know about me is I am very type A and I'm extremely competitive. So this whole story starts when I was in high school. Yeah, right. When I was in high school, I was in JROTC and I wanted to be the top. So I was battalion commander. And my senior year of high school, September 11th happened. So then my professor started saying, hey, you have a really good shot at going to West Point, the United States Military Academy. And I said, well, that's not really my thing. I don't think I really want to. I want to serve my country, but I'm not sure. And then all of the boys in my class said, well, it's not like you could ever get in. So I said, okay. So then I got in. And then I went to West Point. It didn't really work out. So I came back. And at that point, when I was at West Point, my small goal for career was to become Secretary of State. Very small goal. Yeah. So then at that point, being at FIU, Florida International University, I figured, well, now I have to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I still couldn't. I got my degree in English literature and Japanese studies. And then someone said, why don't you teach until you figure it out? And I said, yeah, sure, I could do that. And that ended up becoming my entire career because I loved teaching. I taught English, I taught Japanese, Spanish, I taught linguistics. During that time, I did my master's while I was working, and I got a master's in linguistics because I found that through teaching, what I love doing most is teaching others language and exposing people to language and learning and teaching them that they can learn a language. So once I did that, I set my sights on Georgetown. So then I went to get my doctorate in linguistics at Georgetown. So
you can do that though. You can't do that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's always been about just competing, like what's the next competition, right? Very motivated. So then at that point, I had already taught K-12. I had taught public and private school. I had taught university level. I had taught community college. So at that point, I figured that I wanted to have a bigger reach. There's something called heritage language speakers, which is essentially, it can be either an immigrant child or it can be somebody whose first language was, for example, me, Spanish, at home or in your native country. And then when you come to an English-speaking country, you're surrounded by English. Your schooling is in English. Everything is in English. So your first language kind of starts going down and your second language starts going up. And so then you have kind of like this quote-unquote incomplete or insufficient acquisition of your first language. So then you're called a heritage speaker. And that is what I mostly taught in Miami. And I realized that there was a paucity of resources, tools, and professional development for teachers to be able to help these students. So I thought that I needed to go above and beyond to really bring awareness to these populations. So eventually, after graduating from Georgetown, I started looking as to how I can make a bigger impact, and I found ACTFL. So I applied for ACTFL as a senior manager of quality assurance and certifications. I did not get the job. I was one of 2 finalists, but I really felt so passionately about the mission and vision of ACTFL that I asked the manager at the time, look, I really feel passionate about this. Is there something I can do for free? Can I consult with you guys? Can I do something? So they had me as a part-time consultant while I still was a department chair at the school. And 2 years later, the person who had that job left. And I went in and I became senior manager. And eventually they had an entire reorganization and they created this director of professional learning role that I oversaw a department of 9, and that is where I am today. And I've been there for a total of 5 years.
You're obviously not one to give up. You're a fighter. It's a quality I've found in leaders to just be very hard to quantify, but very hard to teach. And as a father of 2 kids, I kind of want to like read through the screen and like pull some of that out of you and like inject it into my kids, because I think it's just it's such a great trait to have to succeed. Is like, you hear a lot of people talking about it's not about achieving, it's not about starting, it's actually in some cases just about not giving up and just continuing down the path. And like some people get to where the hard part and then they just give up, or they believe they have to give up or they should give up. And I just keep hearing there's like a resounding trend here that Celia, just like you push through, and that's amazing. Tell us a little bit more about ACTFL and like what was that mission of ACTFL that drew you in and just said, I'm not giving up here.
So essentially, ACTFL really strives to create a multicultural and multilingual world where everyone has equitable access to language education. It's no surprise to anybody that we're currently facing a national teacher critical shortage, but even more so in the world languages. Language isn't necessarily seen as something important. Because right now English is the lingua franca, it's the language that's spoken all over. But for a while, so was French. And for a while, so was Latin. And eventually they weren't. So by learning languages, you are really ensuring that you have more people to connect with, that you are more marketable, and that you honestly have more empathy with your fellow man. So for me, that was really important to ensure that as many schools as possible had access to really good, beneficial language education, especially because research has shown that the earlier that you're exposed to a language, the more successful you will be in gaining proficiency on it. So that's something that I felt very strongly, not just about the language education part, but really advocating for teachers, because teaching is such a difficult profession and teachers are definitely undervalued and underpaid and not respected in the way that they should be, and that are in other countries, honestly.
Yeah, my wife's a teacher, as I mentioned before the show, 19 years teaching. I hear a lot of that. I hear all the time about the shortage. I fully embrace and feel the underappreciation, just as, again, married to one. So let's go back to the association world. So you didn't just jump in with ACTFL, like you started doing all these other things, volunteering, like that is the association community. I love that part about the association community, is that there are so many opportunities to volunteer. Were you drawn to these other volunteer opportunities, or is it just your nature to like not sit still and do 100 things?
I definitely, go ahead, sorry.
The answer could be both.
I definitely do not stand still. I always want to grow. I feel like complacency is not in my vocabulary. I'm a perpetual learner. I always want to continue growing and continue learning. So when I got into associations, I was already looking at, well, what do I need to grow to the next step? And when I got into ACTFL, I thought ACTFL was it, that would be where I went and where I would retire eventually, because I'm an educator and I went to an education association. And it wasn't until there that my previous executive director, Howie Berman, he kind of started introducing me to associations, and so did one of my colleagues, Michael Pereira. He started introducing me that associations are much bigger than that. So then they motivated me to join DELP, or to apply for DELP, and I got in because I had just barely made that 3-year mark that I needed to get into DELP. And so when I got into DELP, I mean, my colleagues have just been so incredible. And I remember sitting on that bus in Detroit in our orientation, and I turned to one of my DELP colleagues, Joe, and he was talking to me about how he's an executive director of an association that has nothing to do with him. I mean, it has to do with women and OBGYNs and so forth. And I said, well, how are you leading that if you are not that? And he's like, well, you can be an executive director of any association. You don't have to be of the field to be in that association. And that blew my mind. So from there, my goal was, okay, now I want to be an executive director. So what do I have to do now to get there? What is it? What do I need to really add? So then at that point, I started just seeking out whatever I could. I've been working with so many mentors, just talking to people, and I've been really thankful and really lucky that through this experience, I've been able to get my CAE. I've been able to make a lot of great connections at ASAE Annual, and now that's really led me to, I guess, make up for lost time in the last few years, and now I'm in everything at the same time. But I just love serving. I think that I want to surround myself with people that know more than me, because that's how they're going to help me grow. And that's how I learn a little bit about everything so that I can now help others grow as well.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like leadership to me. I mean, I talk to a lot of leaders, and one of those things outside of lifelong learning, serving, servant leadership, not giving up, empathy, which you mentioned earlier. And so there's a point, like we talked before the show also about empathetic as a leadership style. And you brought up the term trauma-informed leadership. Like, talk to us a little bit about that term, where that came from, how that sort of influences your style as you step into these more leadership roles, not just in the associations, but in the entire community.
So it's one of those things that I was doing this before I knew what it was, or that I knew it had a title. But for the majority of my career, I never really had good mentors or good leaders or good bosses. And so as I would go through my entire career, I would just take mental notes of what my leader or what my boss was doing and say, I'm going to do the opposite of that. I am never going to make anybody feel the way that I'm being made feel right now, whether it's taking credit for my work, not empowering me, putting me down, not allowing me work-life balance. And so then when I had the final chance to be, I was a leader as a department chair, I was a leader as an assistant director of Georgetown. But when I finally got to a place where I can now be a leader of a department of different styles of employees, I always said, I'm going to lead with curiosity, for example. So instead of just assuming a narrative or instead of giving people a narrative, I always give my colleagues and my subordinates the benefit of the doubt, ensuring that I'm always initiating curiosity, that I'm always meeting them where they are, that I'm being empathetic. More importantly, that I myself am vulnerable and authentic. Because if we really want to build relationships, which is really the heart of leadership, if we want to build relationships, you cannot build relationships if you yourself aren't willing to be vulnerable and authentic. And that's kind of what I lead my team. And it's been really successful so far.
I think you said a lot of great things there. The center of empathy that you've gained, it sort of came from bad experiences. Were there also any good experiences kind of woven through there that you would also point to that you've taken forward?
Sure. I think the good experiences have been in the way that I've been able to kind of change my perspective on it. And again, assuming positive intent from the people that were not necessarily great leaders, but assuming that they were just doing the best that they can. And so I've also learned really good things about, key performance indicators, and also really good about how to strategize and how to, push people forward, even though it might not have been done the best way, but still that whole thing of putting your employees first in terms of motivating them, because you yourself cannot be successful as a leader if your direct reports aren't successful as well. So kind of like that whole, I changed from having projects that the projects that were successful were my form of success to now my success is measured by my people. So I think that was a good thing that I learned from that too.
Yeah, I had to learn that lesson as well. For a long time, I thought being a leader was what I could do. And if I could do it well, then I would just do more. And I had to learn over time that actually the fruits of my success are really, as you said, what those people that I'm leading can do and how they grow more than anything else.
I'm still struggling with that sometimes, but for the most part, I think I caught on.
No, I get it. Giving up control. I just had this conversation with one of my colleagues the other day. It's like you having to learn to delegate, but also in a way that's leading that person in the sense that I want that person to grow, and sort of vicariously I will be successful through that person succeeding and growing. And I also learned through that, and what I was telling them was the more I hold on to and do that myself, I'm actually the mentality that I would use is I'm actually robbing those people of the opportunity. And so it seems almost selfish for me, even though I believe in some cases that I could do it faster or I could do it better or what have you, I am in turn just taking somebody else's career opportunities by handling that myself.
Yeah.
What about, I didn't ask you this before the show, but I hope maybe you're ready to share one. Is there a mistake you're willing to share that you've made along the way? And I ask that because I love, as a listener of podcasts or of anything else, like a good book, if I can read something, I love the moments where people are vulnerable, they shared a mistake, hey, I own this, and that's usually a lot how I've learned. Now, I've also learned a lot because I just made a lot of mistakes myself along the way because I hadn't learned that or I didn't listen. And I always jokingly say I got a lot of scars on my back from all the mistakes, falling down and all that. But is there one in particular that stands out to you? We go, I really learned something there.
Oh yeah, it's like fresh in my mind. I mean, it's always there. And it's funny because I share this, again, talking about vulnerability and authenticity. I always share this story with my team just so that they know that I also have messed up and that I have made mistakes, and that if we were able to overcome that mistake, I can overcome any mistakes that they've made. My first year as senior manager of quality assurance, I was responsible for working a lot with consultants. And a particular consultant, I had a budget for her to do a specific project. And I just told her, hey, I need you to do this project. It's going to be this amount of money per hour. We're approximately thinking it's going to be around this much. And she said, okay. I knew, because I had done that project before at Georgetown, I knew it should take her about 15 hours max. When she finishes the project, she submits her invoice, and she said it took her 55 hours.
Oh.
And the first thing my director asked me is, did you give her a cap? Like, did you say, these are the amount of hours that it should take you? If it takes you anything more than this hours, you need to tell me before I approve it. And I said, no, but that sounds like a great idea. I should have probably done that. And I thought, oh, that's it. I'm going to get fired. It was only, I think, my third or fourth month at ACTFL. I'm like, oh, well, start packing up my office. Let's go. And it was one of those things that she said, well, let's talk about negotiating. You know, obviously she did this work. Let's talk about negotiating, meeting her halfway. Maybe we can pay her in like certain sections and so forth. But my lesson from then on was to be painstakingly explicit and transparent when working with consultants and about actual expectations, and not assuming that just because it takes you 15 hours to do something, that it will take everybody else 15 hours. So that is a really great lesson that I always keep with me.
Yeah, that's a great lesson that you learned directly from you actually not maybe setting the expectation in that case. I also think the other lesson that I heard in that story was just the empathy from the person on your side saying, I don't know where those bubbles come up from.
They agree with my story, I guess.
They agree with your story, 100%. Was that it wasn't just a situation that you expected, like, oh, this person's going to come in and fire me. It was a teaching moment on both sides for them to say, like, okay, well, yes, this happened. And so I think there's two sides of that story.
Yeah.
And I have also made that same mistake far too many times. It was like, I get to the end result. It wasn't what I expected. And then rather than pointing the finger, you sort of have to point the thumb back at yourself and go, wait a second, did I actually set the right expectations? Mm-hmm. Did I give the right timeline? Or am I painting something in my head that I just didn't communicate really well? And I hear a lot of leaders that spend a lot of time and energy, and I'm learning throughout my own journey and career that communication is just such an important element of leadership. I mean, it is empathy in that you have to share. I feel like in some cases, everything comes back to communicating. You can think all the thoughts. If you don't communicate them, they won't work. You can set all the right tasks. If you don't communicate the right. And somehow, weirdly, it is centered around language. Like maybe we've hit the nerve here. Like that's the center of all that is Celia, is this communication language. Like how important, how often do you think about communication as a leadership style or tool?
Every day. I mean, communication, like as you said, is the heart of it. It's if you don't communicate, and obviously the more languages that you can communicate that with, the better, because
Yeah.
that means that you get to diversify your pool of applicants and your employees. But absolutely, language is at the heart of everything that we do. I don't know if that was a rhetorical question or you were actually asking me a question. So
No,
sorry
I was
about that.
asking you. I was asking. I was curious. Like, I do.
Yeah.
I hear about that. I have a passion for marketing and associations because I feel like those membership and marketing teams specifically are in
Hmm.
charge of that, in charge of that portion of the membership, which I just think is such a key component. And again, as you talked about your own journey leading towards being an executive director or taking the next steps within associations, I assume you meant in associations. I didn't ask you directly, but you want to stay in the space, right? I would say at least we want
Yeah.
to keep you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Associations, nonprofits. I mean, I have to because I want to continue being an ASAE. So I have to stay in associations.
Are you coming to annual? Are you going to Cleveland this year?
Absolutely. And I have an Ignite session that's going to really upset some people, but it's talking about leadership lessons in a putting your milk in before your cereal mentality. Because I am that person that puts my milk in before my cereal, and that makes a lot of enemies for some reason. I don't know why that's a very touchy subject for people, but
Wait, that's a real thing. You really put your milk in first?
oh yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
like
yeah, I assumed
I
that was
like.
a metaphor for something, but you're
I
saying
mean, it's both. I really
okay.
do, but also it is. And it's just talking about just being authentic and, being yourself. And even if it really upsets people, I like crunchy cereal. I don't like my cereal soggy. I have a thing with texture, so I like putting my milk in first.
That's hilarious. Well, definitely, we will definitely go see that. I will be in Cleveland with the whole teams, and we'll come to your session. That sounds amazing.
Just don't
What?
boo me.
What's that?
Just don't boo me when I say that.
Oh no, I definitely will. That's you now set the stage. I'm 100% going to heckle you, as I would normally. Well, is there within the association or maybe ACTFL, this is a question I always love to ask people. What are some of the things that, excite you each year that you look forward to, again, specifically in associations or in your current role?
I think the main thing that really excites me, which is kind of, again, it goes back to the main word of this whole podcast, is leadership. I feel that in my role, I've been able to take a really big hands-on approach in diversifying our team, as well as really growing my own managers. So when the reorganization happened, this was a brand new team, and I was really in charge of making sure that we start setting it up for success. And I was able to pinpoint 3 people within the organization that had been coordinators or just worked on projects, and I saw leadership in them. They just hadn't been polished. They just hadn't been tapped, but I absolutely saw that leadership in them. So I worked diligently to get them ready for managerial roles. I trained them, and honestly, all I did was just empower them and give them a platform. And through that, I have done that for 4 different managers. One of them has left and essentially become an associate director elsewhere. But for me, that's been one of the things that excites me the most, is seeing them succeed. A lot of them are now involved with ASAE. 2 of them have gone to Next Gen. So it's just a really exciting time to see ACTFL itself and as an association grow in its leadership and its representation in ASAE, because before that, ACTFL wasn't really known. And I feel like we're really starting to get our name out there with these wonderful leaders that we're producing.
So I'm curious, what are the things like specifically that you saw in those 4 individuals that you empowered them, gave them the platform, gave them the opportunity? What is the identifier? I think this would be good for people to hear. Like, what are senior leaders looking for in maybe they were young. I'm going to call them young leaders, even if it's not age-wise. They're just young in their leadership journey. What are some of those things that you see in people that you can point to and you go, that person will be a leader?
Growth mindset, a drive for trying to always do something better, collaborative spirit, very good communicator, a good teammate. And within that, being a good teammate, it shows that, they see a teammate struggling and they show the initiative to go and say, hey, how can I help you? Or, hey, here's what I want, here's how I think we can grow next to, make something more efficient. So just a lot of innovation, taking initiative, compassion, growth mindset, and just that drive. I think those were the kind of the things that I saw, even though they might have just at that point been a coordinator or a project manager. I saw those things already really shine. And all you needed to do is just, I mean, to be honest, one of them told me when I approached her and said, I think that I want you to be a manager. Let's work on getting you a manager. She looked me in the eye and said, absolutely not. I can't be a manager. I'm like, why not? No, I can't do that. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going to let you, you're not on your own. I'm going to be here every step of the way. I will walk you through this. And we did the training, and like I did a lot of PD alongside her. We role played, we had all these things. And by the end of the year, she said, I'm really confident in this. And now she's a senior manager, hopefully thinking about being a director soon. So it's just, it just takes someone to say that you believe in them.
Also, for anybody listening, if Celia ever taps you and says that something's going to happen, you should just accept it and go along for the ride, is what I've learned too. Because she's not going to give up on anything, so that's great. What about on the flip side? Are there things, we're obviously not going to call anybody out by name, but are there things that you see in people, in organizations, in teams that are the opposite, that are absolutely toxic, that you can identify and say, this is maybe holding this person back? We're not going to say anybody could never be a leader, because I think that everybody can learn and grow. It's not an innate thing. Anybody can learn to become a leader, and maybe sometimes it takes shorter timelines, longer timelines. But what are the things that you see most often where you go, that's really holding that person back from being a leader?
That's a great question. I would say for sure a lack of collaboration. What I see often happen is that, and I think we talked about this in the beginning, I want to surround myself with people that are better than me. I want to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, because I can learn from them, and in turn they can help me. Whereas I think that people that hold themselves back are people that are so self-conscious, or that are so, they lack such self-awareness that they refuse to let anybody grow with them, or they refuse to bring anybody up with them, and they kind of gatekeep things because they feel so, I guess, not self-conscious, but I guess the word is, see, all these languages that I have in my head and I can't think of one word to say, but they basically, I think they lack the self-esteem that the minute that somebody is as good as them or better somewhere, they automatically feel defensive, and that they don't want to help that person grow. And I feel like then in that aspect, they themselves cannot grow, because how are you going to learn from anybody that's better than you if you refuse to surround yourself with people that are better than you, or you refuse to empower others because you're so worried about them taking your position, or them, going above the ranks than you? I feel like this is a game. It's not, the race is against yourself, and you need to just constantly be not worried about everybody else, but worried about yourself. So I feel like people like that are the main ones that I see that are very toxic and that never grow into leadership. They can be maybe great managers, but they'll never be a good leader.
Yes, self-awareness is huge, and combining that with being vulnerable, I think, are really, really important. You just have to recognize, everybody has to recognize at some point, you're not great at everything. And when you try to put yourself out there as the expert in something, or even competent in some cases on certain areas, and you're not, that I feel like is very obvious to others. And if it's not obvious to you, that becomes a roadblock. And so you have to understand there's certain aspects that you're not good at, you need to grow in. It's not all equal. You're not like the best at everything.
Right.
And once you realize what it is where the areas within yourself that you need to grow, those are great opportunities. If you find somebody who's willing to work with you, the right person that's willing to work with you. But one, you have to be like self-diagnose yourself a little bit, or ask others. And then you have to be vulnerable to the point that I'm not good at that. I feel like, to me, it's almost easier to get past the person who is insecure but willing to learn than it is the person who's overly confident, who is completely shut off to the fact that they have issues. Yeah. I don't know if there was a question out of that, but just more of a framework or a comment. So just pause. What are some of the things that you think about at the executive director level that shine, and the leaders that, so you've said in the past, like, okay, these weren't great leaders, but you certainly have leaders maybe in the industry or outside of the industry that you go, that person is excellent at XYZ, and that makes them that brought them to where they are. Like, what are those things that you kind of look at and maybe admire, maybe emulate for those leaders that are in those seats?
I would say foresight is a big one. I mean, just being able to already think of solutions to problems that aren't even here yet is incredible. And that's something that I'm constantly striving to learn. And I just like to surround myself with them and just maybe like immerse myself in some of their genius, because I think that that's something that, even though I'm really good at having some foresight, I really can't necessarily have foresight of things that don't exist yet. Also, just being able, I think, having the relationship building. One of my strength finders is woo, which at first I was a little taken aback by. Like, really, that's one of my top 5 woo, apart with competitive and hyperachieving and so forth. But every time that I see an excellent executive director, they do have that charisma. They have the ability to create relationships and to talk to people and to make people feel seen, to make people feel like they're the most important person in that room. And I think that takes a great skill. So really having the foresight, having those people skills and charisma, and honestly be able to wrangle the board and play a lot of politics. I think that for me, one of the great lessons that I've learned in my job is how to create buy-in, how to be able to deliver not so great news, or how to have two parties that are in conflict be able to kind of reach a common middle ground and say, hey, we can't do this, but we can do this. As long as there's buy-in from both parties, we can have success. So I think that that's a really great, important aspect to have as an executive director.
Yeah, buy-in, absolutely. Maybe even at all levels, especially at the board. What are some of the things that you've learned as it relates to gaining that buy-in from groups? Is it more compromise? Is it more encouraging? Is it more, I got to negotiate? Like, what's sort of the angle that you take there when it comes to buy-in?
I would say it's active listening. Actually listening to the other side. Even a lot of times we go into a discussion or we go into, try to like get a collaboration, but we already have our idea set in our head. And anything that person is saying, we're not even listening. We're automatically thinking, how are we going to respond? How are we going to debate? But I found that when I go in there really wanting to listen to the other side, they feel that and they say, okay, you're listening to me, so you actually hear what I'm going to say, and then that's already building that trust, so that when I say, okay, I hear what you're saying, here's my side of it, what can we do to maybe get both of us to achieve something? And I feel that, again, because you already went in with that authentic, active listening and wanting to engage with them, it again builds that trust to be able to create that buy-in. That's what I would think is the most important part.
Yeah, trust, empathy, listening, communication. I feel like we've just nailed the pillars of leadership there. We've come go back to the communication and all things Celia from the beginning of your career forward, to date. What about something fun that our listeners just don't know, couldn't find online, couldn't find on your resume? Tell us something about yourself that we just don't know.
Well, I feel like, as you said before, we started recording, that it was really easy to find out a lot about me on the internet, which is a little scary. So I might have to Google myself afterwards. But I would say, okay, so a few things. Number one, I'm a really weird juxtaposition because I went to West Point Military Academy, but I also worked for Disney World. So apparently both of those can exist in the same person.
Again, different leadership styles, maybe.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of both.
I always point with my hand, not with a finger, right? That's Disney. I also run marathons, as can be seen by my medals here. I hated running when I was at West Point. I loathed it. That was the one thing that if I could make disappear from the world, I would. But then during the pandemic, I said, you know what? What is the hardest thing that I never thought I could do? Run. Okay. So then I started doing marathons, and that's what I do now. That's kind of like my off time. And another thing that I never thought I would do was I was never an athlete. I was more of a bookworm when I was in high school. And my son has become a baseball player. He's turning 10 next month. So I have officially become a baseball mom, and I am 100% embracing it. I know a lot of terms. I first thought that instead of runs, they were making scores or they were making points. But now I've learned, that it's not fourth plate, it's home, things like that. So yeah, perpetual learner.
All the lingo. My son Walker, played several years of baseball. We had the umbrellas. We had, the chair, the trunk all the time. We had all the water bottles, and he's now moved on to basketball and all the things. But, well, just so that I don't think I have to say this at all, and because I think that, the future's a little bit been set here, but I'm going to say it just to confirm it. You'll never be an executive director. I'm just going to say that just so that I confirm that you will be. So that was the purpose of that.
Appreciate it.
What I've learned is I'm going to tell you can't do it, and then you're going to go prove me wrong, and I hope you do in this case. And Celia, thank you for this time. It's been my pleasure having this conversation with you, and I'd do it again sometime if you're up for it. I'm sure we can talk more leadership and pillars and all that. As I do at the end of every episode, I'd love to know, is there somebody in your association network that you think our audience could benefit from hearing next?
Absolutely. I've already mentioned his name once earlier, but Michael Pereira, he was one of my managers at ACTFL, and he has grown to bigger and better things. He's the vice chair of the Young Professionals Committee. He's just an incredible person, and I think that your audience would absolutely love hearing from him.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I look forward to the conversation with him, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you.